All right, we are, I think, ready to get going. So I want to welcome everybody to our webinar on this Friday evening. Tonight's presentation is on transforming the outdoors for diversity and inclusion with Ashawna Abbott. Before we get going, I'll give us just a few introductions and a little bit about how all of this is going to go this evening. My name is Lauren Bohr, and I am the Education Coordinator for Public and Youth Programs here at Mohonk Preserve, and I will be monitoring this presentation. You can post questions in the chat, and I'll make sure that Ashawna can get to them. If you have any questions or issues or anything, you can put that in the chat as well. As I'll be monitoring that throughout our presentation. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end, so you can put them in the chat and I can read them off to Ashawna. There is also the speak option, so you'll probably see that there's a couple different things that are going on here besides the chat. There's also this little hand that says speak, and that will allow you to raise your hand, ask a question, and I can accept you, and you can speak directly to Ashawna to ask a question if you're not so comfortable typing something in. So that is an option, and we'll open that up at the end for questions. This is going to be recorded, so some of you may be watching this as a recording, so thank you for doing that. It will be available online on our website and our YouTube channel shortly after. I can't promise when, it's Friday, but it will be by the end, by Monday. We'll say by Monday it will be available. I will send links to everybody who is registered, so you'll be able to get that. You can always access our virtual program offerings, our webinars. You can access them through our webpage under virtual recordings for our programs that we do here. So there's lots of great webinars that we're doing, and we just had another one this week on fungus. So without further ado, I'd like to give a little introduction for Ashawna. So it's my great pleasure to introduce her. Ashawna is our outreach coordinator here at Mohonk Preserve, and she has several years of experience in environmental education as well as therapeutic recreation, which has deeply influenced her love for connecting people of all backgrounds to the outdoors. She's a native of the Hudson Valley, and Ashawna has been involved with various environmental groups and organizations, interning at Norrie Point Environmental Education Center, and participating in the Hudson River Eel Project, where she first caught the bug for environmental education. She's an avid birder and a vocal advocate for diversity and inclusion in the outdoor spaces. So, without further ado, I'm going to let Ashawna take over for our presentation this evening on transforming the outdoors for diversity and inclusion.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lauren, for such a lovely introduction. I'm so excited to introduce this topic to you all of transforming the outdoors for diversity and inclusion. So a little bit about myself. Like Lauren said, I am the Education Outreach Coordinator at Mohonk Preserve, and I have a background in therapeutic recreation. When I was a rec therapist, I was able to work with marginalized communities of color and people with behavioral challenges to help them achieve their life goals. And doing that work, I was able to use nature as a therapeutic modality. Nature is such a healing force. And that really influenced my desire to help people connect to the outdoors. And so my past work experience, my life experience, my culture, my identity as a Black woman living in this country, all influences my personal lens. And so I bring this up to say that, you know, as we go through this presentation, we'll be looking and delving into some painful history. And as we explore this topic of diversifying the outdoors, if you feel any internal reactions to any of this content, one, please feel free to ask questions, but also think about your own personal lens and how your worldview may be shaped by your experience, your culture, and your identity, and how that might shape your reaction to some of the content I'll present. I've also included the mission of the Mohonk Preserve, which is to protect the Shawangunk Mountain region and inspire people to care for, enjoy, and explore their natural world. This resonates with my personal philosophy And I want to ensure that everyone, regardless of identity, feels inspired and feels like they have a place in nature. So here's just a snapshot of how our evening's going to look. First, I want to make sure we all understand what inclusion, diversity, and equity means. These are terms that are often thrown around, and I want to equip everyone to be able to use these terms in conversation. We're also going to examine the nature gap. We're going to examine why there's a lack of POC participation in outdoor pursuits. And to explore the nature gap, we also have to look at the past to observe how it influences present day barriers that prohibit POC participation in the outdoors. And then finally, we're going to end on ways that you all at home can help support inclusion, diversity, and equity in outdoor spaces. So let's start defining a few important terms to our conversation here. So diversity. Diversity is about representation. It's about people of different identities coexisting in a space. And so our differences help make up diversity. Differences which can be visible or invisible, such as race, religion, gender, sex, age. These are all defining traits that help create diversity. And just to be clear, an individual can't be diverse. Diversity reflects a community or a group of people. These traits are also differences that affect how we're treated in society. They're not just random quirks. So for example, if I gather a group of people with different hairstyles, that doesn't reflect diversity. But if I gather a group of people of different races and religions, that reflects diversity, these characteristics that affect how we're treated in society. Because these are things that define us. And so if I take this group of people, if I take this diversity, we need to take it a step further and make that group inclusive. We want to ensure that everyone feels welcomed, valued, and respected in an environment. I really love this image here to the right. It shows individual puzzle pieces for diversity, representing different people. And then to be inclusive, we all need to come together. So we're not ignoring or tolerating difference, but we're truly celebrating and encouraging difference and diversity to come together. And then outdoor spaces, this is a term that will come up a lot as well. When you hear outdoor spaces, think of national and state parks, recreation areas, trails, campgrounds, places where people go outside to recreate. And so we can't have a conversation about diversity and inclusion without also talking about equity. Equity, you can think of equity as fairness. It's treating people fairly so that we can all access the same opportunities. Equality, in contrast, is when we treat everyone the same. And we can see the differences between equality and equity in this image to the right here. In the first part of it, we see these three individuals, and they're all trying to observe a baseball game. And so when we treat these people with equality, we're giving them each the same resource. So each person is given a box, a single box. But we can see, however, that even given the same resource, not everyone can observe this baseball game. And so to approach this situation equitably, we have to allocate resources to our more vulnerable communities so that we can all access the same opportunity. In this situation, viewing a baseball game. I also like the contrast to reality all the way on the far right of our image. We see that some people, some members of our society are given so many resources. Meanwhile, there's other marginalized communities that our society has neglected to provide resources for. And we can take this analogy a step further. Equity is more than just providing people with boxes. So here's an example. Let's say there's a nature center that is hosting a free outdoor event at one of their trails. The nature center then sends the event details to its members, its member list, and advertises it on its personal company website. So to anyone not already aware of the Nature Center, this opportunity is inequitable. This Nature Center can make this opportunity more equitable by going out into the community, connecting with local organizations, schools, and trying to reach a wider audience than its already established audience. It can even take equity a step further by providing transportation to the event, because often transportation can be a barrier to participation in opportunities like this. Any questions so far? All right, not seeing any questions. Good. So we covered those terms, and now we need to delve into why diversity and inclusion is important. There's several reasons, but here's just a few as it pertains to the outdoors. So changing world demographics. Our world is becoming more and more diverse, and we can see those trends reflected in our society as well. The US Census projects that by 2045, more than half of the US population will consist of people of color. And so for environmental organizations, environmental educators, really anyone in the environmental field, we need to make sure that we are keeping up with these changing demographics, we're reflecting this in our workplace, and we're serving all of these people. Looking at the data gathered by the Outdoor Association, we see, however, that gap in POC participation in outdoor spaces. In 2020, 74% of people regularly accessing and utilizing outdoor spaces were white. So we need to try to change these statistics. We need to try to encourage and have people feel represented in outdoor spaces. In the workplace, diversity is also important. Studies show that workplaces that encourage and foster diversity and inclusion are typically more productive. But for anyone who's ever worked in the environmental field, very often there's a lack of POC representation, and entry-level positions into the field and internships typically don't pay a livable wage. So for anyone newly trying to switch into the environmental field, anyone supporting a family, this can be a huge barrier. Quality of life. In the beginning, I mentioned that nature is an incredible healer, and studies show that nature can improve your mental, physical, emotional well-being. It can improve your quality of life to regularly access nature. And so we need to ensure that access to nature is equitable for everyone. And then environmental awareness. When it comes to issues of environmental justice, climate change, it's the most vulnerable communities that are typically impacted first. So if we can go into those communities and get people to care about what's going on, about environment, about how they might be affected by these larger issues, then we can all work together to advocate towards environmental justice. So we're going to jump into exploring the nature gaps. We're going to explore why there's that lack of POC participating and utilizing outdoor spaces. But to do that, we must first examine the past so that we can understand how it influences the present. This issue is systemic. It's rooted in systemic racism that influences barriers and current day prejudice. So the history of racism in the American outdoors extends back to the colonizing and settling of North America. Nearly all the land in America belonged to and was inhabited by indigenous people for millennia who were forcibly removed from their land. And at the same time of this colonization, the United States was building its foundation off the backs and bodies of enslaved Africans, establishing social and a racial hierarchy with regards to land in the outdoors that we still feel the effects of today. We can also see this exploitation, this exclusion of people of color from outdoor spaces in the start of the conservation movement. So let's look at John Muir. If you don't know him, he was the most famous influential naturalist. He founded the Sierra Club, which is a huge environmental organization that still exists today. And he's even touted as the founder of the national park system. He's often given praise for the conservation of national parks like Yosemite. He was a huge influence to the land conservation movement. At the same time, John Muir also held eugenics beliefs and beliefs that Native Americans do not have the right to own land. He believed that they were too primitive to be able to hold land, even though they had lived in this land for centuries before colonization. John James Audubon, he's also another naturalist and esteemed ornithologist of the 19th century. And the Audubon Society was named in his likeness after his death, which is an organization that still exists today. And John James Audubon, although he had such impact on ornithology conservation, he also owned slaves. And he even had slaves collect animal specimens for him that influenced his research. So we see similarities in the beginning of our country, in the beginning of the land conservation movement. And we see that from its inception, environmental conservation is rooted in colonization. When conservationists called nature the great equalizer, they were only thinking about the cis white American male. And although a lot of time has passed since the inception of land conservation, that message still reverberates today. So now, taking into account that past history, now we can see how it's systemic and how that influences barriers that people of color face today that influence the lack of participation in outdoor pursuits. So number one, feeling unsafe outdoors. Even after slavery ended, so going back into history a little bit, even after slavery ended, people of color were still routinely lynched in public outdoor spaces. There are people of color today with great-grandparents who remember that fear. And so if that fear is instilled in our great-great-grandparents, they're going to pass that down to their children, who pass that down to their children. And so it becomes a generational fear. We also still see incidences of racial injustice in the outdoors. Take into account the Amy Cooper incident that happened last year. If you're not aware, Chris Cooper, a Black naturalist and birder, was out in a New York City park, and Amy Cooper, who was walking her dog off leash, happened to encounter him outside. She immediately called 911 saying that her life was threatened. She felt unsafe. She needed them to come immediately, and other grand statements like this. Chris Cooper happened to record this situation, and it did not happen as Amy Cooper described it. He was outdoors, just enjoying nature, and unfortunately was placed into this very unsafe situation. So that's just one example of the many things that happen very often that make people of color feel unsafe in outdoor spaces. Physical access to green space is another large barrier that prohibits POC participation in outdoor spaces. Redlining. This is housing segregation. And so essentially with redlining, local governments enforced housing segregation through zoning laws and essentially through not selling land to people of color in predominantly white neighborhoods. And so these predominantly white neighborhoods were established in beautiful areas with access to green space. And it essentially forced people of color to live in areas with factories, with pollution, because of this extreme redlining. And so redlining wasn't abolished until the Fair Housing Act of 1968. That is in our recent history. So we still feel the effects of redlining today. And very often there's high concentrations of people of color living in megacities, living in areas that have very little access to green space. And so that is a huge barrier towards participation in outdoor spaces. And then the lack of representation. If we were to all go to Google right now and look up outdoor recreation, outdoor pursuits, we would typically see images like the one on the left here of a certain demographic of people. So we really need to tackle all of these barriers. We need to challenge that representation. We looked in the past and we saw that from its inception, the conservation movement was meant for the cis white American. So we need to break this mold. This is a huge barrier. And then again, the perceived disconnect that the outdoors is for white people. From its inception, it was made for white people. And so, you know, moving forward into our presentation, we see this nature gap, we see these barriers. And I think this quote sums up the nature gap fairly well. The inequitable distribution of nature's benefits in the United States is not the result of a consenting choice of communities of color or low-income communities to live near less nature. Nature deprivation is instead a consequence of a long history of systemic racism. It's all very systemic and it's all very rooted in the foundations of our society. It's not that people of color don't want to be outside, it's that there were all these barriers that have been cultivated and fostered over time from the inception of our country. And so I want to end talking about the gap that exists by also acknowledging people of color today who are reclaiming nature. Because people of color, environmentalists of color, we are out there, we are here, and we are trying to diversify the field and change the mold of who should be represented in outdoor spaces. A really important event that I thought was important to highlight, the National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. This first occurred in 1991, and it was for and by people of color. All over the country, even people from Chile, people from Mexico came to this leadership summit. And all these people gathered to talk about issues of environmental justice. This was the start of the environmental justice movement in America, people of color coming together and bringing issues to the government, asking for change. So I thought that was really important to highlight. And today there's current environmentalists, there's youth leaders, there's people of color in positions of power in environmental organizations that are trying to pave the way and make change. One of them is Rue Mapp, and I have a video here of Rue Mapp. She's the founder of Outdoor Afro New York City. It's an organization that aims to connect people of color together to get them outdoors and hiking, and it's an incredible initiative and has fostered safe spaces for people of color. I would say even outside of New York City, all over New York. So let's see if we can get this video to play. If not, I have a backup.
They are a community of men and women connected by a shared love of nature. And the group's founder says they're challenging false perceptions along the trail.
Outdoor Afro's coming through.
Outdoor Afro started off as a blog in 2009, and from my kitchen table, I'm having this conversation about all the things I loved in nature, and people responded back about their own stories and the things they loved about the outdoors, and eventually people wanted to get together with each other. I grew up in an outdoor-loving family. We had a ranch up in Northern California, and it was truly my laboratory where I learned about not only how to connect with nature, but also how to welcome others in nature.
Catch us the next go round.
Check out that view.
Wait a minute. This has been our view all day long. This is why we do this.
Yes.
One of the things that we decided we would be really intentional about was to really help shift the visual representation of who we imagine gets outside, and especially who can lead outside. Stereotypes did exist about the things that Black people didn't do. But what I found was that people had all kinds of other connections to nature. I always refer to Harriet Tubman. She was absolutely a wilderness leader. She had to know how to navigate just using the stars at night. and other clues in nature. I asked who wants to be an outdoor Afro leader, and about 12 people said yes, they would join us in this discovery of leadership in our communities.
I was looking for an outdoor organization like Outdoor Afro when I moved to Arizona. I really wanted to find a group of folks that looked like me, enjoyed the outdoors.
We made it to land!
I remember when I was 9 years old in my big loopy cursive, writing in my Hello Kitty diary about my very first time camping with the Girl Scouts. And I had no idea that that blog would grow up to be a platform like Outdoor Afro. And Outdoor Afro is absolutely here with open arms, ready to receive all of the interest and all of the representation that is possible in the outdoors. And I always say to people, you don't have to have an Afro to be a part of Outdoor Afro. So everyone's welcome to join us.
I love, love, love that story. What an inspiration.
All right. So I just really wanted to end on that note of showing people of color outside participating in outdoor pursuits. Again, it's not that people of color don't want to participate in outdoor recreation. A lot of us already are. It's just that we have to take into account the systemic barriers that have existed since the inception of our country. We have leaders like this, like Room Map. We have people of color coming together and truly making change in the environmental field. So we have gotten to that point of how you all at home can help make outdoor spaces more inclusive. First, you can help support POC-led initiatives and organizations that strive to increase and highlight POC participation in outdoor pursuits. And so there are hundreds of organizations that you can support in and out of New York State, but I just chose a few to highlight. Feminist Bird Club. Feminist Bird Club started in 2016, and it emphasizes inclusive intersectional birding. It aims to make the birding field inclusive and really focuses on social justice in a lot of its work. Its board members consist of people of color, and there's chapters all over New York State. So I think there's even a Hudson Valley chapter if anyone's interested. I've been a member of the Feminist Bird Club for a little while now, and it's really incredible to see their growth and see their reach and see this inclusive birding environment. Outdoor Afro, another organization that we just looked at, we just examined. Outdoor Afro has grown so much since its inception, and they have about 100,000 members today. So something that started just from a blog of a woman of color talking about issues she's facing outdoors, now growing into this big organization that affects so many people and creates a safe space for people of color outdoors. I personally find that rather inspiring. Let's Go Outdoors. This is an initiative that started also in 2016 by two women of color in Philadelphia. They've noticed a lack of environmental education opportunities in their neighborhood, and so they created Let's Go Outdoors, and they provide environmental education to underserved and marginalized communities. And then the Clearwater Sloop, I couldn't end this without bringing it back home. The Clearwater Sloop is home in the Hudson Valley, and it has a long history of advocating for environmental justice. And educating people up and down the Hudson River. I've personally volunteered for the Clearwater Sloop. They have like LGBTQ themed weeks, and they really truly embrace and celebrate diversity and attempt to be as equitable as they can be. And so you can support these organizations by following them on social media, amplifying their messages, donating to them even. So many different avenues that you can support these organizations, or even volunteer to join a few of them. You can also help by uplifting and amplifying POC voices and imagery. So we all use social media in one way or another. And so online, you can follow organizations like some of the few that I just talked about, as well as individuals that amplify diversity outdoors. There were two individuals I wanted to highlight in particular. Alexis Nicole Nelson. She also goes by the Black Forager. She seeks to decolonize foraging. Foraging has become a really trendy activity for people in the past few decades, and she seeks to show that people of color also forage. And so her platform is really educational. It promotes environmental justice and encourages people of color to go out and forage. And she also often talks about people of color and their history with foraging, which is really tremendous and exciting. Highly recommend giving her a follow, helping amplify her message. Yes, really incredible content. Isaiah Scott is also another voice I wanted to mention. He also goes by Ike's Birding Hikes on social media. Isaiah Scott is a huge birder. He's really big in the birding world. His content is educational and oftentimes funny. So you might get a good laugh at some of his content. And he also seeks to decolonize birding. So I highly recommend giving these two individuals some of your attention, a follow, share their content. And then there's a few initiatives that happen online through the power of social media. Black Birders Week. This has been an initiative that's happened the past 2 or 3 years. And it typically happens at the end of May, beginning of June. And so if you look up Black Birders Week, you'll see a list of webinars that you can attend, as well as hashtags that you can follow on social media. So some of those hashtags might be, Black birders in nature. And so you can go look for these hashtags and see this imagery of people of color in nature. So that's one way that you can find this imagery and help amplify it. And then another online initiative similar to Black Birders Week, Black in Environment Week. This aims to highlight Black environmentalists. And again, you can tune into webinars created by people of color and also follow hashtags. You can also help teach the history of outdoor spaces. This applies more for outdoor organizations, environmental educators. A lot of organizations are taking on creating land acknowledgements. This is where they essentially acknowledge the history of colonization on the land that they potentially own. And so this is just a tiny step towards equity and towards progress, but it is something, having organizations reckon with their history, reckon that, this land was taken from, Lenape people or X or Y. And so to take it a step further, I also wanted to address a few organizations that I brought up towards the middle of my presentation that are really trying to repair relationships with marginalized communities. So the Sierra Club, I had mentioned, was started by John Muir, who was incredibly racist. So instead of ignoring its history, Sierra Club has tried to face it, and they actively talk about dismantling racism and reckoning and repairing their relationships with marginalized communities. The Sierra Club has actually started an initiative called Detroit Outdoors that I thought was rather interesting, that aims to fix up neglected parks in urban areas. They provide free recreation and outdoor equipment for people of color. And again, on the Sierra Club's website, they actively talk about dismantling racism. The Audubon Society as well is also trying to reckon with its turbulent past. And so they also actively talk about dismantling racism. They openly talk about James Audubon and his relation with owning slaves. And they encourage people of color to apply for their higher positions on their board. And they have internship initiatives for people of color. And then the Land Back movement. You all might have heard of this. And so the Land Back movement is essentially aiming to provide land, give land back to Indigenous communities in our country. Save the Redwoods League, an organization in California, actually recently gave 500 acres of the redwoods back to the Sinkyone Wilderness Council, an Indigenous tribe in California. So again, all incredible initiatives that organizations can take on to repair relationships, acknowledge the history, and really help to create a more inclusive, equitable, and aware environment. Equity, here's that word coming back again, equity, equity, equity. So again, this is a little more for organizations, but physical accessibility is really important for people to participate in outdoor spaces. So here's a real world example. In Washington, the King County Park System created a shuttle service called the Trailhead Direct in 2017. And its intention was to help more people access nature trails in Washington. And so they noticed an increase in their visitation and their trailhead visitation by implementing this shuttle service. They also noticed that the shuttle wasn't servicing areas or neighborhoods where there were high concentrations of people of color. So recently, in the past year, they implemented 2 more shuttles to service a more diverse population. And they saw an increase, a 75% increase of people attending their nature trails. Like that is a huge real example of how making things more equitable, helping people access nature easier, like helps everyone. And then cost can also be a prohibitive barrier to participation. Very often national parks, campgrounds charge a fee for people to access them. And so if we can mitigate costs, if we can have a sliding scale even, a few organizations even have months where they have free membership, free access to their nature preserves and areas during certain months. That really helps to encourage different audiences to access these outdoor spaces. And then inclusive signage and marketing. We live in a multilingual society. There are lots of languages and different people who live in our country. And so if we encourage inclusive signage, inclusive marketing, where lots of different people can read it and interpret it, then we can see an increase of people of color accessing these outdoor spaces. The image I have on the slide is just a picture of interpretive signage at a preserve in Texas, talking about their pollinator sanctuary. And you see that it has both English and Spanish on it for both Spanish speaking and English speaking visitors. And then bring a friend outdoors. This is something that anyone can do. This is a picture of me and a few personal friends. I've truly had some of my best experiences outside, just bringing friends who, you know, aren't typically exposed to the outdoors. And also, if you bring a friend outside with you, you're creating a safe space for them to, you know, pursue outdoor pursuits with you. So this is just an easy step that you can take. Just find someone that you know, bring them outside, show them something new. It's just a great way to reconnect with people and to help make the outdoors a little more inclusive and safe. All right, that is it for my presentation. I'm going to stop the slides now. And I'm curious if anyone has any questions. Oh, Lauren, you might be muted. I don't quite hear you.
Oh, see what I forgot. Okay, that's just par for the course. It's Friday. Yes, so I was saying it is time to open it up for questions. So if you are a little camera shy or voice shy and you would prefer to type in your question into the chat, please feel free to do that. If you would prefer to ask the question directly, you can hit the little speak symbol, which is that hand, and then I'll be able to allow you to, your camera will turn on and you'll be able to ask a question. So there is one here. So Mary Lynn would like to know, what was your inspiration to work outdoors?
Oh, my inspiration to work outdoors. My inspiration, well, I mean, throughout high school, I participated in the Eel Project, the Hudson Valley Eel Project. So that really got me outside. And then I heard about the SCA, the Student Conservation Association, through word of mouth from a friend who was just like, hey, do you want to go to Norrie Point with me? Do you want to go check out this environmental center and this event they're doing? And I immediately fell in love when I visited, and that's kind of where it all took off. Yeah.
I think that's a very similar story for a lot of us who are in this profession. Like, we just had this moment, this experience that just really inspired us. It's very true for birders. Like, what was your gateway bird? What got you into birding so much? So, and having those kinds of opportunities available to everyone is so important. And it's really awesome that when you were in high school, because you are from Hudson Valley, you are from Poughkeepsie, yes. So it's so awesome that you had this opportunity in high school that many other people don't have an experience. They don't have that chance to do that. Something that we do here at Mohonk Preserve is we have our City Kids on the Ridge, and we work with a couple of schools in the Newburgh area. And through a grant, we are able to bring them on the land throughout the school year. So they do get to come to us and experience the outdoors, and they get to hang out with us and learn from us in the natural world, where they do come from a very urban environment. So bringing them here on the land is really inspiring. And at 6th through 8th grade, so our 8th graders, they kind of graduate from us, and the hope, and I think a lot of them do, they continue on in the environmental field in some way. And that's really wonderful. I love that program.
It was kind of like, for me, it was a full circle moment, because I started as a high schooler, as a participant in the Eel Project. And then eventually I worked for Norrie Point and helped to like manage that program that I was once a student in. So just a true testament to like fostering environmental stewardship young, you know?
Yeah. Definitely. So let's see, there's another. Oh, Marilyn said, I love that gateway bird. Okay. I made a comment about the gateway bird. Yeah, I think for those of us that do love birding, there is a gateway bird that's something just like your eyes lit up when when you saw that bird. So yes, I love the things that you mentioned too, the Black Birders Week and Outdoor Afro. I know that you and I have been talking about possibly doing something for Black Birders Week. And it has been about 2 years. I think this will be, I think it started in 2020. And I believe that Black Birders Week was in response to the Christian Cooper incident. So through that, I actually met, through these webinars, these talks, I met some very wonderful people. And one of them I do follow on social media, Alex Troutman. He's fantastic. He's a young gentleman who is studying conservation science, and he also teaches. He shares his knowledge, and he just has this infectious enthusiasm and smile that you just can't help but be like, oh, that's the coolest stuff you're talking about. So I encourage you to follow him as well on social media. He's a great one to learn about and listen to. Let's see. So another question from Marilyn is, any ideas on how to encourage public transportation to outdoor spaces? And this is actually something that I have been thinking about. We are retooling our youth programming, and one of the things that I would really like to do is work with Kingston, Poughkeepsie, and somehow get transportation for those kids to come to us for a youth program. And have it be all about stewardship, trying to bring those who wouldn't normally have transportation. We're not on a bus line, So and then cars, just a lot of times you don't have the car. So getting that transportation. So do you have any thoughts about getting access for our transportation to our outdoor spaces?
Yeah, I think that's kind of tricky just as an individual. If your nature center or preserve happens to be along a bus line, really creating like pamphlets and literature around that at your visitor center, just to kind of highlight it and encourage people to utilize that, I think would be one way to help. Or even just talking to your local like bus transportation system. I don't know, advocating for a bus route. That might create change, but I'm not too sure into the actual implementation of a shuttle service.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I was fascinated. I was taking notes. I was fascinated by the initiative in Washington to get that shuttle service going. And
I believe that was like a grant-funded initiative. So that's how they were able to implement. Yep. So maybe through grant writing, you can be able to generate funding to have that service at your preserve.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. Dave says, Ashawna, please talk about fish kill eels outdoors in the city.
Talk about eels and outdoors. I'm a little confused by this question. Oh. just rant about eels, or
I just a direct quote from Dave. Maybe he can explain a little more.
Oh, sorry, you got cut off a little bit. Can you just reiterate?
Sorry, yeah, maybe he can explain a little bit more. But he just says, please talk about fish kill eels. Oh, I think it's him. I think he would like to. Yes, let's say hello. All right. Oh, I accepted you. Okay. Hi, Dave. Can you hear and see us and say something? Oh, I'm not sure what happened. I accepted. I don't know what happened.
Okay. Well, it's been quite a while since I've worked with or done eel monitoring, but I still think eels are an incredible indicator species. I love supporting the eel project when I can, and I still volunteer from time to time. I think they might have set out their nets already. And yeah, I would encourage anyone to volunteer or participate. Oh, I think I see
Dave. I think Dave is joining us. Hi, Dave.
Oh, good. Okay.
Hello. Long time no see.
Hello, dear. How are you, Ashawna?
I'm good.
So I thought you might want to talk about, and we could both talk about the wonderful experience of the city of Poughkeepsie students doing the eel project at the Fallkill Creek. With I believe the teacher's name was Mark Angevine. I don't know how many times you went to Fallkill, but right there, smack in the city, they would bring the students, and I have wonderful memories of these kids who probably had never done anything outside, and they would show up very timid and unsure and just not sure what's going to happen. And an hour later, they said, I can't wait to come back again next week. First time, getting in the water and counting, fish. So why don't you expand on those, experiences, from any times you went there, and how it can be an example of doing environmental work inside a city, whether it's eels or birding or water quality in the Fallkill Creek. Scenic Hudson has some projects, has run some projects as far as cleaning up the creek in the city. So could you expand on your thoughts and experiences in that arena?
Yeah. I mean, I guess talking specifically to the eel project, I feel like they do an incredible job of representing people of different backgrounds and different races. And, they really do a good job of fostering diversity, whether that be in who's participating, in the media behind it. I just remember hearing about the project and feeling energized and excited for it. Like, oh, I could maybe have a place in the outdoors. And yeah, there's even like a little clip. I think they were on PBS for just a hot second when I was in high school. And there's a clip of me being like, I thought eels were slimy and gross and, uncomfortable at first. And now I can't get enough of them. And so, I don't know, it's just so cool to be a part of that representation. And to feel like, I have a place in conducting research and monitoring eels. It's really empowering. And I would definitely say that helped to kind of strengthen my confidence that I have a place in the environmental field, and I can also encourage other people. I can have this cyclical moment of now being an educator and influencing students that were once in my shoes to, pursue careers in the environmental field. So I hope that speaks to your question.
Yes. Well, again, we all need to do a better job of highlighting and supporting and encouraging environmental activities in urban settings. You talked about transportation of getting people to outdoor spaces, But cities are also outdoor spaces and have creeks and parks and topography. And again, whether it's birding or water quality, park cleanup, the new community garden that Scenic Hudson is doing in Pershing Street in Poughkeepsie. I mean, I've had the privilege of being involved in all those. So if we don't have the facilities to bus them out to nature, we need to find areas in cities where we can teach wildlife, environmental issues, climate change, water quality, you name it, counting wildlife. Scenic Hudson does some things on their parks, the salamander research. Some of that's close by. You can do that almost anywhere there's wetlands. So, thank goodness for teachers like Mark Angevine. He's the only one I know of personally. If we get the teachers to just walk the kids out of the school building and down the street to something, expose them to the outdoors nearby.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with your sentiment. And I think that's also what energizes me for the work that I do now, working for Mohonk Preserve. Because as an education outreach coordinator, I get to go into the schools and bring environmental education to the students. I recently just facilitated a program on species and climate change. And I provided these students with tools that they can use in the field, in their schoolyard, to learn about climate change.
Yes.
So yeah, I love that importance of bringing the science to the youth.
Right. So if we can't, transport them to the place, we need to, have the place bring them to the places nearby. And by the way, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned the other wonderful example of somebody from that program, Martis Smith, who started at Poughkeepsie and the fall. Counting eels as a high schooler and is now an employee with the DEC.
Yeah, Martis is the one who brought me to Norrie Point. He's the one that kind of started it all for me. And he also showed up in my in the picture at the end of taking your friends out to birds.
I thought that might be him, yeah.
Yeah, that was him.
Super. Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your questions, Dave.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we as I was going to say, but you already said this, Ashawna, in your position as the outreach coordinator, you have the great pleasure of bringing all of that nature to the schools when they can't necessarily come to us. So besides the climate change program, the climate and species program that we have, we also do our pond keepers. So we bring ponds into a classroom to teach them about macroinvertebrates and all that wonderful stuff. And we also are starting on with an initiative with the Kingston Central School District. So we're going to be bringing nature lessons to them, to their schoolyards, right wherever they are. I mean, they could just have a patch of grass out front, and that's the only green space they have, but that's what we'll work with, and that's what we're going with. They could just have a soccer field or something, and that's it. But there is nature there, as you said. There's nature there. The birds are still going to come, and they're still going to be there, and there's still going to be dandelions in the grass to count and explore, and little insects all around to find. So yeah, these are some of the little initiatives that Mohonk Preserve is doing. And I say little, but really they are big, because as Ashawna mentioned, that full circle coming around, you don't know who you're going to inspire along the way. And who's going to really grab hold of it and become an Ashawna and come out and work at Mohonk Preserve and create more Ashawnas. And for all of us in the environmental education world, we have had someone, whether it's a teacher or someone who says, hey, have you heard of this? You want to try doing it? We've had someone in our lives that have opened that door for us. And we've been able to go on in our careers, and then we can also inspire others to come and do that. So really, that's really what all of this inclusion is about, making people feel safe and welcome, and that they are here and they are represented, and it's exciting to be out here and being really enthusiastic about what we do. So yeah. So are there any other, excuse me, are there any other final questions? Oh, I will say that the fall kill eels outdoors in the city was highlighted on CBS Sunday Morning recently.
Oh, okay.
Like about 3 weeks ago. So
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I know. Now I'm like, where's the Google machine? I'm going to need to check that out. And I usually watch that show, but I haven't been for a while now. So, yeah.
And Ashawna, I don't know if you caught any of them, but especially as during the COVID lockdown, Bowser and Sarah and that gang at Nori did several Facebook Live and YouTube Live podcasts right from the river, standing in the river, counting fish or doing water quality, so forth. I don't know if you caught any of them, but I believe all of those are recorded and they're out there and available.
Yeah, virtual learning is another great avenue to explore, to like get people to care about nature from the comfort of their couch. I did tune into a few of their Facebook Lives, and even at the Preserve, we've kind of done something similar with our nature nuggets, which were like, Facebook Live sessions of like exploring nature activities you can do at home. I think it's really important that environmental organizations kind of jumped on doing that, especially in the pandemic when a lot of people were stuck indoors.
Right. So we environmentalists sometimes need to compete with video games. If they have to use social media, the internet, or computers, or whatever, to get the kids connected to the outdoors, and these kind of projects and things that are interesting. Again, YouTube is all over the place. And, I mean, even my granddaughter, just she lives on it. So we gotta compete with the video games, and the music videos somehow.
That's right. Yeah, that was one of, I guess, the benefits of the pandemic is that these places that were inaccessible, maybe because they're on their side of the country, or you just didn't have transportation, even if something local, these organizations were able to live stream from a stream, right? Or from the woods, and educate people from the comfort of their own home. And these educators were going out, and we did similar things. So we had our nature nuggets, which you can view on our YouTube channel and our website. You can access those if you're curious about them, along with all of our other virtual recordings that we have of our programs that we're doing, including this one. So I think that we're all good here. I think we have had a lot of good questions and a lot of good conversations here. And this is recorded, so feel free if you want to, maybe you weren't taking notes during this and you want to go back and maybe view some of the things that Ashawna mentioned, like you forgot about some of, you didn't quite write down fast enough some of the organizations and that Ashawna talked about. Please do watch again. I will be sending the link out at some point in the next couple of days. You'll be getting that, and it will be posted on our website and our YouTube channel. So you can always access that at any point to go and view other things. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Ashawna, for presenting, and thank you, Dave, for joining us as well at the end here. That's great. I hope everyone has a really lovely weekend. I hope you get outside. This is the Great Backyard Bird Count Weekend. It started today, and it runs through Monday. So get out there and do some birding. Take part in community science. Bring friends with.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Bye-bye.